What's going on, guys? It's your boy Luke here for our NFL live stream for week 14. We're going to go position by position, talking about some of my favorite plays for the slate, touching on some of the injury news that's coming out, all that sort of fun stuff for you guys. So, first off, going to hop right into our quarterback projections to not waste any time at all. And you guys will see that I have a little bit of a condensed pool this week. There are a few value options down low that I like, but there's only really one or two that I'm taking risks on. First and foremost, got to talk about them. Going to be Taysom Hill. It's going to be the chalk of the slate. I have him projected right now for nearly 13% ownership, but honestly, that's well warranted. I mean, the Jets, there's one way to go ahead and take them down. It's with the running game, and Taysom Hill, majority of his production is going to come with that rushing upside. So I really do like him in this matchup. I also really do like Alvin Kamara. I'd be a little bit worried about playing them together just because of the vulturing that they'll do to each other in terms of TD production. But as isolated plays, perhaps as a naked type of stack, I think that they give you a ton of upside. So Taysom Hill there at $5,600, one of my favorite value plays on the slate. I also look for Cam Newton to have a little bit of a rebound week. This Falcons defense is one of the worst units in the entire NFL, particularly against the run, which means that guys like Cam Newton, once they get down into that red zone, are going to have a ton of success. So I like going to him there. He's only $5,400. Really, it comes down to ownership. If you want to go ahead and fade that Taysom Hill ownership, Newton becomes a much better play. But at the same time, in terms of median projections, you can see it's nearly a 4-point difference. So Taysom Hill definitely the one that you'd want to go to out of those two. Let's talk about the studs, though. And there's really two or three that I like a lot more than the others. Let's touch on those first. First and foremost, it's going to be Josh Allen. This matchup against the Bucs is ideal. You're talking a high over-under game, a really solid offense on the other side. And overall, expect a ton of fantasy points to come from this game. So whether you're targeting Tom Brady down here or Josh Allen, I don't think you can go wrong. The issue right now is that both of them are popular. I mean, you'd expect that. It is the prime time, key game of the week, what everyone's really going to be watching here this afternoon. So that shouldn't be a surprise. But I don't hate going to either option. Tom Brady's also in my player pool as of right now. I just ran some lineups because I have so many guys exited off here, particularly in this mid-range, and all the value options super far down low. I'm not really all about. I am able to prioritize these guys up top. Lamar Jackson is also somebody much like a Taysom Hill that I like using on his own. He's somebody who does a lot of his damage with the run. Obviously, don't love the matchup against the Browns. They're one of the better defensive teams in the NFL. This is also one of the lower over-under games on the entire slate. But you can see his ownership reflects that. It's just at 2.5%. And anytime we're getting Lamar Jackson or any type of player like that with that kind of upside at sub 5% ownership, I'm going to be all over it. So I do like going to him there. He's a very good GPP pivot play when it comes to ownership for large field things like a Millie Maker, that kind of thing. And 2-3 max, I might be a little bit more hesitant just because the median projection isn't as high as it usually is. But in large field stuff, I think he gives you a ton of upside. Justin Herbert, he's in a good matchup here. He's likely to be without Keenan Allen. That means his wide receiver is going to be Mike Williams, Jalen Guyton, and Joshua Palmer. I do like going to some of those value options for the Chargers, obviously using Justin Herbert as well. He's in my player pool. He's not a priority for me, though. Again, the priorities, I would say, would be Josh Allen and Tom Brady. Also Patrick Mahomes, who we didn't really talk about, but we don't really have to give him a ton of breath here. We know that he's one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. We know that the stacking options for the Chiefs are elite because they're such a concentrated offense. They're also just really expensive. So I'm not getting a ton of Chiefs this week. They're just a little bit priced. They're priced a little bit out of my comfort zone. Taysom Hill, we already touched on. So let's move on to running back now. At running back, we have a ton of value this week. So I'm looking forward to talking about this here because there's a lot that we can do to save some money. And honestly, there's some good stud options as well. So there's a good mix of plays here, which we'll get into. And start off with the value plays because that's where everyone really wants to talk about. Beyonce Foreman is actually one of the sneakiest plays of the week. He's coming in with sub 5% ownership. He saw 20 carries last week in their win, and he gets another nice game here. It's a good game script. You're talking about a relatively high over-under game. You're also talking about a huge spread for the Titans. So really, that's a fantasy goldmine. Anytime we can combine a relatively big spread with a high over-under game, you're going to want to take the running backs for the favored team. And that's exactly what we're doing here with Foreman. I also have Hilliard in my player pool as well. It's going to be the running back 2 for this team. Even though he had more production last week, he only did it on 13 touches. So was more hit or miss. I mean, he had that huge touchdown, which really carried his production. But Foreman, because he was getting the bulk of the load, particularly in the second half as they were trying to run away the clock, he's clearly the alpha male there. He's who they're going to use on the goal line. He's who they were using to try and run out the clock. So Foreman out of the punch is the one I like more. He's also coming in lower owned and he's cheaper. So you get a lot going for him there. Jeff Wilson Jr. is one of my favorite plays on the slate as well. The Cincinnati Bengals defense is solid. I mean, they are missing a few key guys on that defensive front, though, so that should be helping Jeff Wilson Jr. Elijah Mitchell is inactive. Trey Sermon hasn't really been a key part of this offense for a few weeks now. So Jeff Wilson Jr. and JaMychal Hasty, they will be getting all the carries here. And Wilson is the far superior back. So I do like him there in that matchup. He's $4,400. He is garnering ownership, so it's not like he's going to be completely overlooked by any means. But I do think that's well warranted. Same thing with Jamar Jefferson. He's also coming in relatively low owned. He's going to be the key bell cow back for this Detroit Lions team. And the only real issue is the game script. I mean, they are, obviously not favorites here. They're one of the worst teams in the NFL. So if they end up getting behind by a bunch of points early, he could be worked out of the game script, which gives me a little bit of cause for concern. Also the ownership. So if I'm going to be honest with you, I'm a little bit more likely to go to somebody like a Jeff Wilson Jr. just because we know he has that workload in him. The 49ers, even if they're playing from behind, are going to run the ball. That's their identity. That's what they're good at. Unlike the Lions, which will definitely go pass heavy if they get behind. Also Foreman, they're huge favorites rather than a team that's supposed to be a huge underdog. That gives you a lot of leverage when it comes to value. A lot higher floor. Let's go to the top of the board now with our stud options. Austin Eckler is the chalk this week, but it's well warranted. Got a high over-under game. They are massive home favorites. You like to see that over a Giants team. Alvin Kamara, I really like him in lineups where I don't have Taysom Hill. He's somebody who, again, has a great matchup against the Jets. This is the worst defensive team in the NFL against the rush. So Alvin Kamara could have a huge game. But again, there is some negative correlation between him and Hill. So I'd be a little bit hesitant about those stacks. Leonard Fournette at $7,400. He's a great way to get ownership to the Bucs without taking Tom Brady. There's a huge, there's an avenue for success for Leonard Fournette that really takes away from Tom Brady's upside. So perhaps if you're going to the Josh Allen side of that game, stacking up the Bills, run it back with Fournette rather than some of the wide receivers for that team. It'd be a little bit less chalky, a little bit more unique, and to me projects almost just as high. Ezekiel Elliott there at 20.7 points. There's no Tony Pollard, which means we're looking at 20 to 25 touches for Elliott and a positive game script, relatively high over-under game. Those are the kind of situations that we're looking for. A few of the no's here. Joe Mixon's a little bit banged up. Not 100% sure he's going to see his whole workload there. Cordell Patterson, they are not the favorites against the Panthers. That's really the worry there. He's seen a lot better rushing production of late. Those have been in positive game scripts. Moving on to the middle tier range, there's a few plays here that I like. Not a ton that I love, though. This is really where you're going to get a little bit unique. You're not going to see as high ownership in this range. People are more willing to spend up for these stud tier guys or go the whole way down to some of these value plays. And to be honest with you, I can't blame them. So we'll talk about some of the plays here, but I don't love a ton of them. Clyde Edwards-Helaire in that high over-under against the Raiders, always a good option. Could end up scoring a bunch of the touchdowns, taking that away from Patrick Mahomes, which makes him an interesting pivot for GPPs. Chuba Hubbard, I talked about him during my sleeper picks video. He's garnering a little bit more ownership now. So you can see he's getting, right where he should at this point, but I still think he's a really good play. They are the favorites here against the Falcons. The Falcons are an atrocious defense. So for the same reasons that I liked Cam Newton, I also do like Chuba Hubbard here. James Robinson, if they were favorites against the Titans, would be in an absolute smash spot. There's been a lot of media takes saying that he needs to get the ball more. Trevor Lawrence himself actually said that to the media. So James Robinson definitely should see a higher usage rate. The issue is it's a bad game script, right? They should lose this game against the Titans, which really would limit his upside. Hilliard, we already touched on, so let's move on to wide receiver now. Go ahead and hide the running backs. And wide receiver, like usual, I really like spending up at this position. I believe it gives you a little bit higher upside than you would at other positions like running back. And there's also a lot of value here too. So I like taking the more stars and scrubs approach in this range. If I'm going to be a little bit more balanced, I like doing it running back or even at tight end, that kind of thing. But at wide receiver, let's start with the value because there's two amazing plays on the slate. First and foremost, Byron Pringle. He's $3,200. He played 70% of snaps last week for the Chiefs. It is seemingly the number 2 wide receiver and one of the highest over-under games, one of the highest team totals on the entire slate. as an absolute gold mine. Again, he's only $3,200 and has Patrick Mahomes thrown on the rock. You have Joshua Palmer down at $3,000. He's likely to be the number 3 wide receiver for the Chargers today. You'd have Mike Williams at 1, number 2 Guyton, number 3 Palmer. The thing with Guyton and Palmer, though, I do expect it to be a snap share, something like a 60-40, something like that, or even higher than 100%. You could see something like a 75-50%, something like that, because they're going to use some 3 wide receiver sets. So you're going to see a lot of snaps from these guys. And he's only $3,000 with a good quarterback throwing to him. He has Justin Herbert, obviously. Somebody like Denzel Mims, while he is going to see a similar type of snap share, the reason why he's not a core play for me is he has Zach Wilson throwing on the ball. There's a huge difference in talent right there, and that's going to affect the wide receivers' projections as well. Let's move to the top of the board, though. I wanted to touch on those value plays because they're some of my favorite plays on the slate. But at the top of things, these top 2 wide receivers, they're going to be priorities for me in my pool. Tyreek Hill more is a one-off. I'm not going to have a lot of Patrick Mahomes, but I am going to have a lot of usage with Tyreek Hill. He has such a high ceiling, such high upside. It's always somebody I'm trying to fit into my lineups. Stephon Diggs, I love using him with Josh Allen. While it is a little bit of an expensive stack, I have a lot easier time fitting that in than I do Patrick Mahomes and Tyreek Hill. And you're talking about an $800, $900 difference in terms of the price. It makes a huge difference here. So I can just tell you from all the optimizations that I was running, I can use guys like Pringle with my Patrick Mahomes stacks, and it still doesn't make a difference. I still can't even fit them in. It's a pretty rough price point on some of those Chiefs players. And if you can find a way to fit them in, then God bless you. But you're looking at quite sketchy value at that type of point. So anyways, we don't really need to drive these 2 home. We know that they're great plays. The top 2 plays on the board. I'm in high over-under games. CeeDee Lamb, he's coming in a little bit lower owned than he should. He's actually the lowest owned player of anyone above $7,000, which is surprising to me. He's extremely high upside. The whole Dallas offense in general seems under-owned to me. Could definitely be a stand that I take here this afternoon. Jamar Chase, he's going to blow up one of these days, going to put up 25 to 30 fantasy points. I'm going to be there every single week until that happens. Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. Now, these are another 2 options, much like a CeeDee Lamb, that are coming in much lower owned than they should. This is a high over-under game with the Seahawks against the Texans, and they're also huge favorites. So much like the Titans, they become a very interesting team to try and target, particularly the passing end, because they've been horrible running the ball. I mean, under 3 yards a carry these last 3 games. You're really looking at a pass-heavy offense, particularly with Russell Wilson rounding back into health. So Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf could end up being the stack of the week using him with Russell Wilson. That is a highly concentrated offense when they're running on full cylinders. So that is a very interesting GBP play for me, particularly because if you guys remember, Russell Wilson was coming in at sub 5% ownership. So all around a great play for me there. Definitely one of my higher owned stacks of the entire slate. Marquise Brown at $6,300. He's just about an average as a play as you're going to get. Median projection isn't very high when you're dealing with a low over-under game. The thing that you have to like about him is that when he hits big. There's a lot of volatility, a lot of top-end volatility, which you're looking for in a large GBP type of contest. And if you're using Lamar Jackson, who's already low-owned, you pair him up with somebody like a Marquise Brown, who's sub 5% owned at wide receiver, you can pretty much play all the chalk you want with the rest of your spots. So it's an interesting take if you're going the Lamar Jackson route, like I will be in some of my GBP lineups. Hunter Renfrow, the price has come up. He was right around $4,900, $5,000 the last few weeks. I'm at $6,100. I think he's priced appropriately. So it's not somebody that I'll be avoiding by any means. But at the same time, he's getting the ownership. He's getting the respect that he finally deserves. Not somebody I'm owning 30, 40% like we have in weeks past. Amari Cooper here at $5,900. I think it's a decent, we've already talked about how I like the Cowboys. I think that they're all being a little bit overlooked. So he's 8.5% owned. He's coming in with a reasonable price point. I actually think it's a little bit cheaper than it should be for somebody like Amari Cooper. So I do like going to him at that type of projection. I have him projected a little bit lower than we have in weeks past. He's obviously dealing with that nagging injury. But against a very weak secondary up there in Washington, could have a very nice week. Brandon Cooks, if you're using Seattle stacks, he's a great option for a buyback. He's a middle tier guy. He's not garnering as much ownership as he has in weeks past because of that Q tag. We'll want to take a look at some of the injuries here in a second to see if he's active, inactive. But he was trending towards being good to go. Now we're talking some of the middle tier values, I would say. This is where you're going to get a lot of uniqueness. So a lot of people like playing the studs at wide receiver. They're going to go the whole way down into the $3,000 range for some of your values, because at running back, the cap is 4,000. So anytime you can reach down into that $3,000 range, or a tight end, people just are in love with playing the $2,000 tight ends. They're going to go ahead and do so. That makes this range from 5,000 the whole way down to 4,000 almost completely overlooked at wide receiver. At tight end, it's that $3,000 to $4,000 range. It gets a little bit overlooked there. With that being said, Julio Jones, without Brown in the lineup, is due for a ton of usage, a ton of red zone targets as well. The only issue is his health himself, right? He's missed a ton of games. He's coming back from the IR. If he plays 80, 90% of the snaps, he's going to smash today. I currently have him projected for playing 60% though. So he's a little bit more of a middling play at that type of projection. But I do like the upside if he ends up being healthier than we expect. So is a GPP play for me. Even in cash consideration, I'd say. I mean, in terms of points per dollar, in terms of just, we know he's the number one wide receiver for that team today. It's a high over-under game. He gives you a lot of safety. So I like that more and more, the more I talk about it in terms of a cash play. Cortland Sutton, he's a pure upside play. I mean, Jerry Jeudy has really hurt his upside. He was the number one wide receiver for a good 8 weeks of the year. He was putting up number one wide receiver type of numbers. But now that he's relegated to the second role, I mean, Jerry Jeudy's he's a beautiful route runner. If you guys haven't seen his play, he looks like Antonio Brown in his prime. And the kid's like 23 years old, something like that. I'm going to be an absolute stud. Cole Beasley, speaking of good route runners, I mean, I like using him in my Josh Allen stacks, but I also like using him on his own. It's a high over-under game. I think using Beasley outside of stacks is going to be well under projected this week. People are going to be slamming him into their Josh Allen stacks, right? Everyone's like, okay, we'll take a mid-tier option, either Sanders or Beasley. Maybe go up to a Diggs. If you want to keep it a cheaper stack, go to somebody like a Knox. Beasley is going to be in 60 to 70% of those snacks, I'd say. Him or somebody like an Emmanuel Sanders. Whereas if you go to somebody like a Diggs and then one of the cheaper options at running back for that team, you're probably talking sub maybe 1% ownership in terms of the stack. So you really got to be careful when you're deploying some of these guys. For the same reason, people are going to be avoiding Beasley outside of those stacks. They're like, oh yeah, he's a slam dunk play. We're going to have 25% Josh Allen, probably right around 30% Cole Beasley, which means they're only playing 5% of them outside of stacks. And that's usually how it goes when people are using their optimizers. They're not paying attention to that kind of thing. Whereas Beasley's a great play on his own. Who says that stack ends up being the top stack of the week? You don't want to be avoiding Beasley as a one-off. So that's something that I just wanted to mention, because a lot of people oversee that. They don't put that into their process. Using good plays on their own is just as important as playing them in stacks. And making sure that you have more exposure to them just outside of those stacks is important. Make sure you're doing that, guys. Tyler Boyd at $5,000, he's an all right play. Emmanuel Sanders, very similar play to a Cole Beasley. He's $100 cheaper. He's coming with much lower ownership. So in terms of just pure foundations of DFS play, in terms of our projections, you see there's there's a significant difference between their projections here, right around 3 points. But in terms of GPP upside, you definitely want to be going Sanders' way. In cash, the obvious play is Cole Beasley. This $4,400 to $4,600 range, I don't really like at all. The only play I would really consider would be a Sterling Shepard there at $4,600. Now that we get a little bit cheaper on the board, Mecole Hardman, he only played 20% of snaps last week, which is extremely concerning. Got to wonder why that's changed all of a sudden. He was playing 50% plus for the entire year, closer to 70, even 80% on some games. And then played 20% last week. So we already talked about the main beneficiary of that of course being Byron Pringle, who played 70% last week. But if he ends up returning to his normal usage rate, he'd be a great play at $3,900. Desean Jackson, he has that home run play upside. When we talked about that last week when he caught that huge touchdown. If he goes out and catches one of those again, he's going to pay off his price tag. Unfortunately, it's extremely volatile. You really can't count on that week to week. But he definitely at least has that GPP type of upside. And now the last guy we'll talk about here at wide receiver is going to be Jalen Guyton. Jalen Guyton at $3,400. He's a similar play to Palmer, right? He's going to get a little bit more usage. He's going to see a little bit more snaps. Very similar in terms of his skill set as well. So you can see their projections right in that same type of range. Ownership 2%. Down here, Palmer 0.7%. So he's a little bit more popular, but I like going to both options there. I think they give you the kind of upside you're looking for. Let's move on to tight end now. And after we go through the positions, we'll take questions and we'll go through some strategy stuff, some lineup building and whatnot. But let me go ahead and share my screen here for you guys. All right. So we got our tight ends up on the board now for you guys. And I don't know. This is probably my least favorite position for DFS. It's very touchdown dependent. You're pretty much going to be hit or miss at tight end every single week. Your guy's either going to put up 4 or 5 points or 15 to 20. It's a little bit frustrating. And what I've been doing in weeks past to kind of mitigate that is I've been spending up a tight end a little bit more. The consensus, at least the chalk build for most weeks when it comes to DFS, as people love to live in that cheaper range, try to take a value tight end. Because it does come down to touchdown upside. If you get a value tight end that scores a touchdown, you're in the hot seat, right? But more often than not, it's a crapshoot. These guys are scoring about 30 to 35% of the time at the best, maybe 50 to 60% of the time if you're a Travis Kelsey, a George Kittle, that kind of thing. That's why I try to go to that top end range, right? It's a frustrating position. For all the years that I've played DFS, it's by far the position that seems to stub me in the toe the most. You'll have a great GPP lineup going, and you'll have Dallas Goedert in there who gets you like 3 points. It's just part of NFL DFS, right? So what I've done to mitigate that is I've started to focus on some of these guys up top. So this week, Travis Kelsey, earlier on the week, I kind of mentioned that he wasn't a priority for me. But as the week has gone on, as I've realized I'm having less and less Patrick Mahomes, prioritizing people like Travis Kelsey or Tyreek Hill on their own becomes a little bit more important, right? Because I have that extra salary, because I'm not trying to spend $8,000 and $7,400 at 2 different positions, because Patrick Mahomes is $8,000 at quarterback. I can play more Travis Kelsey, right? Because I'm not worried about those stacks, that kind of thing. It's not taking away as much opportunity cost as it would in other weeks. I'm going to have right around 25% Kelsey, right around 25% George Kittle, and right around 25% Gronkowski. I'm going to make it really easy for myself this week. I'm going to take these top 3 tight end options that are pretty much by far the best plays on the slate and go ahead and go with them. My Rob Gronkowski ownership is a majority going to be with Tom Brady stacks. Tom Brady, I have right around 25% in my builds. So that makes perfect sense to kind of match those two there with a Rob Gronkowski. Mark Andrews, he's a little bit higher owned than we would have expected just because Lamar Jackson is sub 3% right now. Marquise Brown is right around 4.1%. So he's the highest owned player on that offense. But at $5,900, I do think he has a solid matchup at the very least. Last time they played against the Browns, when Lamar had that massive game, Mark Andrews also had a massive game. Dalton Schultz, he's in a great situation. He will perpetually be in a great situation as Blake Jarwin's out of the offense. He's playing a ton of snaps, getting a ton of usage. I don't mind using him at all. Dawson Knox, a great option for your Josh Allen stacks. Wouldn't really use him on his own, though. Ricky Seals-Jones at $3,600. He's going to be the starting tight end for the Washington football team. Washington tight ends are a gold mine. They get a ton of usage. We saw it with John Bates whenever he was playing there. Ricky Seals-Jones towards the beginning of the year when Thomas was out was also playing extremely well. He's only $3,600. If you guys remember, he was $4,500, even over $5,000 for a few slates when he was really clicking. So that's an obvious value right there. Gerald Everett, if you're using Seahawks stacks, can't go wrong there. The guy's athletic. He has that big play upside in him, and he's also a little bit cheaper. So if you go to somebody like a Russell Wilson, you take Everett, you can easily fit in a DK Metcalf or a Lockett and still spend up at a few other positions. A couple guys down low. Austin Hooper is a little bit more chalky than I'd like, so I'm not prioritizing him in this situation. He's $3,400. Jared Cook's $3,200. Great matchup against the Giants. Again, no Keenan Allen, so we can expect a little bit of a usage increase there. But the really solid option here, the sneaky option at tight end is going to be Donald Parham Jr. Because there's extra usage to go around, I do expect some of that to go Parham's way. He's the more athletic of the 2 tight ends over there in LA. And he's seen a lot of setup plays for him. When they get down to the red zone, they've thrown a few fades his way. They clearly want to utilize him when he can be used his best in the red zone. So I do expect him to have a lot more touchdown upside than anyone else in this range. And obviously, I wouldn't be using these 2 tight ends together. I don't see them hitting their ceiling in the same type of game. If you're looking for the low-owned option, the cheaper option, Parham Jr. is a very sneaky, very high upside play for this week. And now let's move on to defense. And we're not going to spend a ton of time on defense for obvious reasons, guys. But let me go ahead and bring it up. All righty. All right, here we go. Here are our defensive projections. And I'm not spending up at defense very often this week because The value options this week are kind of sporadic. There's a couple running backs we like. There's a couple wide receivers that we like. Going to try and take some more value at defense. I don't think it's necessary to try and take the defense against Mike Glennon. As turnover prone as Glennon has been for his career, the Chargers are also a bad defense. So they kind of mitigate each other right there. They lit up a ton of yardage. They lit up over 30 points to the Steelers. Case in point right there. Broncos defense against Detroit. Detroit's a little bit underrated, especially their offense. And they're a little bit chalkier than they should be. So let's talk about my favorite options. And again, they are going to be at the bottom of the board. So the Lions defense, right, and the Texans defense, both of them, the Broncos, a solid option to go against. Teddy Bridgewater is extremely turnover prone. The Seahawks, though, they've been bad of late, right? So as much as they like Russell Wilson on this slate, I'm not blind to the fact that Wilson's also struggled of late. He's also had a ton of turnovers. He's actually had a couple pick sixes to boot as well. So targeting Russell Wilson over this last month has worked. So why not go back to it again? They're only $2,400 over there in Houston, and they project for 6 points, so 2.5x value. Again, we're not looking for a median point from them. We're looking for that touchdown type of upside. But against Russell Wilson, that's definitely in the cards. With the Lions, they've been a much better defense than people want to give them credit for. We already talked about Teddy Bridgewater being turnover prone. You could go to the Jaguars defense. Same story with Ryan Tannehill. He's turnover prone. This is a really high over-under games. So you kind of you're getting what you're paying for, right? This is the highest total against them of anyone on the slate. The Titans are expected to score a crap ton of points today, but maybe it ends up going the other way. It's only $2,300. These are pure GPP plays. I wouldn't really be rolling them out when you're going to somebody like in a cash game or anything like that. But in GPPs, they score a touchdown. They could easily pay it off. Where I'm really living in cash, really a lot of my convicted plays at defense. This Ravens-Browns game, it's either going to be a shootout or it's going to be like a 25-point game. There's no in between there. I don't see it finishing in the 30s, the 40s, even the 50s. Lamar Jackson's either going to go out there, score like 30, 40 fantasy points, something like that, or he's going to put up like 7 or 8. It's going to be one of those type of games. The last time we had something like this was with the Browns and the Chargers. You guys remember the over-under of that game was like 39.5, 40. Everyone was like, what are you talking about? Like, the Browns are a bad offense, but the Chargers are the Chargers. They put up points in bunches. And if you guys remember, it was like over 80 points were scored in that game. So Vegas was like they had the total half of what it was in reality. This is set as a low over-under game. So that's why I'm saying it's the same type of trap game. Could be extremely high scoring, but at the same time, Vegas expects it to be a relatively low scoring game. So targeting them in DFS, especially in cash, is never a bad idea. Panthers defense, it's more targeting Matt Ryan. Matt Ryan is way past his prime. Probably shouldn't even be in the league anymore. Seahawks defense against the Texans, it's an obvious situation to target with Mills at quarterback. They don't even have Tyrod throwing the ball anymore. So at $3,100, they are cheap enough to let you spend up at other positions, but also give you a lot of upside. And now the Chiefs defense, it's more targeting this Raiders team. As talented as they are, as much talent as they have on the defensive side of the ball, since John Gruden left, since they've had all those distractions, they've been a shell of them former selves. So I do like targeting the Chiefs defense as a result. The Titans you could target against Jacksonville. I want to touch on this because it's ridiculous. Have you guys seen what's happened in Jacksonville, like between the coaches, the players, and like what's being said, what's being put out into social media? That is probably the worst culture I've seen in an organization ever. Like period, the end, regardless of sport. The culture they have over there in Jacksonville is non-existent. It is a cancerous culture. And I'll be surprised if Meyer lasts another week or two. He should be fired immediately. He's a cancer to that team. He needs to get out of there ASAP. Like, I'm not even a Jaguars fan. I just feel bad for them. They need to get rid of that coach as fast as he came in. He's probably the worst coach in NFL history. I'm not exaggerating. Like, if you hear the things that the players have said about him this week, and that's why I wanted to bring it up, it's embarrassing. So I am definitely targeting against them. I'm going to be targeting a lot of players on the offense against them, but obviously the defense playing against them as well. We have already talked about Hilliard. We talked about Foreman. We talked about Julio Jones. Ryan Tannehill, I'm not a massive fan of, but pretty much everyone else on that team I do want to target. I have a question down in the chat. And now that we've gone through all the positions, you guys can throw any of the questions you have down in chat. We're going to make a few lineups together. We're going to go through some of the game theory and stuff. But Chris says, do you like Goff today? So we'll bring up my quarterback projections just to show you where I have them. But I'm not a massive Goff guy today. But I think you could do a whole lot worse, is my point. So let me go ahead and bring it up. So Goff, you can see he's on my player pool. They're playing against Denver. The issue is the Denver defense. They have some of the best cornerbacks in the NFL. Patrick Surtain is an absolute stud. Their secondary between Simmons at safety, just solid players all around. They're all really young. They're extremely underrated. So no, I don't like Goff today. I'd much rather go to those running backs over there with Detroit. Guys in the range you could go to, right? So if you're going to try and pivot at the same price tag, I like Lawrence a little bit more. So as much as I think that they're a dumpster fire, I do expect them to get absolutely blown out today. That should mean some garbage time usage for Trevor Lawrence, and he's been very productive in garbage time in the past. He's had some rushing touchdowns, so I'd much rather look to Lawrence, but I know you got in here a little bit late here, so I'll cover the guys I would much rather play in general. I'd much rather spend up for a Taysom Hill. He's only, $500 more. You're talking about nearly, you're talking about an 11-point difference in projection. So, yeah, spend the extra $500. Go get yourself some Taysom Hill, playing against the worst rushing defense in the NFL, and he's an absolute rushing beast. So, hopefully that answers your question right there for you. Now, let me go ahead and bring up Draftkings real quick, guys. While I do so, let's talk about some of the game theory that I'll be doing for this week. So, first and foremost, I think that the chalk this week, there's some really good chalk, right? We've already talked about some of that, especially at the quarterback position. So as a result, I do think it's important to try and make sure that we're differentiating with our value and then targeting some of the chalk that we think is good chalk. So we're going to go ahead and show you what that would look like. I'll go ahead and share my screen. I've got DK up. All right, cool. So what we're going to do here is we're going to make a GPP lineup. So we're going to go through the thought process of me when I'm making my lineup, the kind of chalk plays that I'm willing to take, and the kind of compensations we take for whenever we take the chalk, because I get a lot of questions about that, like, oh, how do you make your lineups? Like, how do you worry about roster construction? Total ownership is a question I get all the time. Like, what's the highest total ownership you'll go for? We'll talk about all that right now. So at quarterback, if we're talking about a pure GPP type of lineup, Russell Wilson's my favorite GPP play. We already talked about the fact that he's under-owned. He's in a very high total game. They're favorites. Really not a lot to like there. So I like going to Russell Wilson at quarterback. In terms of a stack, I preferred options going to Tyler Lockett. He's a little bit healthier than a DK Metcalf, so I'd rather go there. And to make it a little bit less of a chalky stack, so we can kind of play the chalk at the other positions, I'm going to go ahead and play Everett, right? So rather than taking both wide receivers, I think most people that go to Russell Wilson, that's going to be the avenue that they go to. I don't think a lot of people are going to consider going to Gerald Everett. So as a result, you can play pretty much whoever the hell we want with the rest of our positions. Because we have a low-owned stack here, I'm not going to be worried about playing chalk now. So at defense, obviously don't want to be playing the Texans defense. That would be a huge negative correlation. But the next man up, this Lions defense, makes a lot of sense. We already talked about how I think that the offense there for Denver is a little bit turnover prone, and this Lions team in general is underrated. So I do like going there a whole lot. At running back, I want to take at least one value running back. We talked about a bunch of options during the show. Just to highlight the people I would consider here, Hilliard would be an option. Alex Collins is even in play. Unfortunately, we already have 3 players for the Seahawks, so probably don't want to be looking to him there. Beyonce Foreman's most likely the guy we're going to take here. He's $5,100. We already talked about how the Titans are huge favorites here, playing against an absolute dumpster fire. And a Foreman saw 20 carries last week to Hilliard's 13. So if we're looking at just a pure usage rate type of thing, Foreman would be the guy we would go to there. So let's go ahead and put Foreman in there. Someone else we'd consider going to is Jeff Wilson Jr., right? So we go ahead and look at Jeff Wilson Jr. He's here at $4,400. He's a little bit cheaper. Also in a very solid matchup against the Bengals, so you could go there. But we're going to go ahead and take Foreman because we're not worried about being chalky. So let's move over to wide receiver now, guys. At wide receiver, I do like taking one of these spend-up options. Unfortunately, we could go to a Brandon Cooks. So Brandon Cooks is right around $6,000. We have some extra salary to spend, though. So I'm not going to force the buyback as of right now. If we end up getting a buyback with one of our last positions, then so be it. But I'm not somebody that forces in buybacks, who doesn't create a role. I don't create a role in my optimizer or anything like that to force them in. I think it's a little bit overrated, to be quite honest with you. The only role that I put into my optimizers is going to be forcing in at least one running back, one wide receiver, or one tight end from the team with a quarterback. Sometimes, if I really like a team stack, if I think it's a really high over-under game, I'll push that to 2 from the same team. And if I really, really like a game, then I might, and I say might because it's really situational, force a buyback. Hopefully that gives you guys an idea of how I do that. But at wide receiver, if we're taking a stud option up top, I mean, Stephon Diggs is a great option. Tyreek Hill is too. Let's see if we can fit in a Tyreek Hill. If we have to take that $400 savings and go down to Stephon Diggs, we'll go ahead and change that. But we're going to go ahead and put Hill in for right now. Let's go find our stud option at running back. And because we have $5,700 remaining per position, we're not going to be able to take an Eckler, right? We got to be a little bit more realistic about who we try to pick here. So Fournette could definitely be in play because we're not playing the Tom Brady stack. Perhaps he ends up getting there with some rushing upside. I honestly think that's who I want to go with. The only other option, we could try to take a more of a middle tier guy. I really like Chuba Hubbard on the slate, relatively low owned, good matchup against the Falcons. I think Antonio Gibson's a little bit over-owned, so I will be fading him in GPPs for today. He's in a great situation. No JD McKissick. The matchup's bad against Dallas, though, and they're huge underdogs. I expect Dallas to come out and torch Washington today. You've seen all the media coverage this week, McCarthy guaranteed to win, that kind of thing. While I think that a lot of that's coach speak, I'm not going to let that impact the numbers or impact my projections. I have a really good feeling that the Cowboys come out firing this week. I think they're going to absolutely dominate this game. But yeah, I think we can probably spend up for Leonard Fournette, right? So if we took a Chuba Hubbard, we're looking at more of a middle tier wide receiver and flex. There's a lot of value that I like on this slate. So I'm not going to really worry about trying to keep it balanced. Let's go ahead and take a Leonard Fournette. Now let's move down here to wide receiver. So we have $4,900 remaining per position. Let's go ahead and just put Pringle in here and see what that would look like. Actually, we already have Tyreek Hill. So take that back. So who I would have considered, just to show you what I was thinking Byron Pringle, but we already have Tyreek Hill, right? So it would be a little bit of negative correlation there. The other option I like going to is Joshua Palmer, right? So Joshua Palmer's $3,000 playing against the Giants, gives you a ton of savings. So that leaves us with $6,800 with our flex, which is a ton of money to have. Wait, you can't put quarterbacks at flex. I was like, what? I was like, what is this? I had it on the all tab, guys. That's what was confusing me. I was like, there's no way they changed that, because that would be a huge change to the scoring. That you would want to be putting quarterback at flex for every lineup, but obviously you can't do that. So we have $6,800 remaining per position. Mike Evans seems like he would be a good fit there. We do already have Leonard Fournette, though. We could try to make it a 3-level Seahawks stack, but I don't think that makes a whole lot of sense. So we're kind of in a dead range right here, right? So that's slightly concerning. So what we can do is spend a little bit more for our value option. We don't have to limit ourselves the whole way to the bottom of the board. If you guys remember, there are a few guys in this range that I liked. Jalen Guyton on that same team. He's $400 more. So when we go ahead and take a look at our options, we can more efficiently use our salary at that point. There's a lot of these guys in the $6,100 range we like, even up to $6,400. A T. Higgins makes a lot of sense. We have to make sure that he's active. I believe as of right now, still a game time decision. That's a later game today. So we're not going to hear about that for at least a little bit. If he's a game time decision, we might not hear about it for another 10 minutes or something like that. May have came out during the stream. Obviously, I can't see that because I'm on stream here. But we'll take a look after this and see what's going on there. This is hard. So the flex is always going to be the hardest position to fill. Sometimes it's going to be, no-brainer. And I'm glad we're going over this on stream because this is a time where it's getting a little bit difficult, right? So Jalen Guyton, right? We might want to take a more expensive wide receiver than that because we're not in love with any of the picks that we saw there. It's like, unfortunately, if we're going to spend up, we're going to have to spend up pretty significantly. Mecole Hardman, we talked about how he's in a good bounce back spot. So even though I do like Pringle more than a Mecole Hardman, Hardman's a little bit less owned. He's a little bit more expensive, so he's going to be a lot less popular. And if we do that, it puts us into a little bit more of an appetizable range, right? I like going to Amari Cooper. I already told you guys that I think that he's a little bit under-owned on the slate. So if you wanted to use all your salary, I think this is the type of lineup I would go with here for GVP, at least going with a Russell Wilson stack. If you're playing cash, though, I would not be afraid to go the whole way down to Pringle. I would leave a little bit of salary on the table. If there's a position that you guys don't hate, you can go ahead and upgrade Foreman down here a little bit rather than taking him at $5,100. Do we have enough for Chuba? No, we don't have enough for Chuba Hubbard. Well, we could go to somebody like a Devontae Freeman or James Robinson. Obviously, I'm not a huge Robinson fan today because I think that the Jacksonville Jaguars get blown out. But that's all we have here for the strategy. So good luck with your lineups for today, guys. Make sure you guys like and subscribe if you guys are watching, and see you guys next week.